I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. Mauricio Pochettino has just announced his roster for the USMNT's upcoming friendlies against Ecuador on October 10th and Australia on October 14th. On today's show, we're going to do a full breakdown of this roster, and joining me again is Kyle Bond from the Sporting News. So, Kyle, let's start big picture. What are your biggest takeaways from this 26-man roster that Poch just released?
Yeah, biggest takeaway is that I think this is probably quite close to the World Cup roster. When we compare it, there's a long way to go. Injuries happen, fitness concerns, form can change. But if you started the World Cup right now, my guess would be this would be the roster. We're missing Serginho Dest, we're missing Ricardo Pepi, and we're missing Tyler
Adams.
Other than those three, two of them due to, I believe, injuries. We didn't get an answer in Pochettino's press conference. From what I understand, both Pepi and Dest's injuries are very minor. So I'm a little surprised that they weren't included. Pepi especially, since he has got to get in camp eventually, man. But aside from those three guys, I think this is the World Cup roster.
Yeah. I think neither Dest or Pepi, if I'm not mistaken, neither of them made the bench for their midweek Champions League match this past week. So, yeah, they are, and it's been communicated, as you said, they're very minor injuries, but I don't know. My experience with Poch is just he doesn't take many chances, on the injury front. So I think it's safe to say, even though we didn't address it in the press conference, like you said, those two were left off for that reason.
I'm just a little surprised because Peter Bosz said that Pepi could have continued playing if it was a more important game when he came off injured. And then from what I understand, Dest might even play this weekend. They both might play this weekend in league play, in Eredivisie play. So that's why I'm a little confused or surprised.
Right. And then Tyler Adams, he did mention on the press conference that he and his wife are expecting a baby in the next couple of days. And so that was the reason he was left off. But I agree with you. I mean, we kind of joke, you and I joke that we've been talking about all these camps for so long, and we're like, all right, the next camp, we're finally going to learn where Pochettino stands on some of these players. And we thought this October roster would be that, but then in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, is he going to mess with us again? But this really does feel like that this 26-player roster is who he thinks is the best roster. Like if the World Cup was going to start tomorrow, this is who he would take, minus those injuries, or maybe he would take a few more risks, with the injuries, and whatnot. And so he did pull through. And I'll just mention one of the things that really surprised me about it, just to kind of give people a sense for how much he did change versus last camp. Only 11 players from that September roster made this October roster. So 11 players made it from September, 13 players did not. So he completely turned over more than half of the roster, which shows you just how experimentative that September roster was and how much he was just kind of testing out, some new players.
Yeah, and the guys that did make it from that roster are totally reasonable, understandable, like Christian Pulisic, Tim Weah, even guys like Diego Luna, Max Arfston, not any more surprising. Like these are guys that Pochettino clearly likes, has clearly believe that they are part of this mix, and like it or not, they're in. And a lot of the new guys are veterans. A guy like Cameron Carter-Vickers, who I'm not at all surprised, as you will know, is in this roster. A guy like, you go down the list, Anthony Robinson, Tanner Tessman, all these guys, they're not surprising at all. Haji Wright, even, he's in great form. And then there's only a few experiments here. There's still a few experiments, but all of them are players that have fully deserved a call-up. James Sands, Aiden Morris. And maybe both those guys don't get called in if Tyler Adams is fit. Or a Patrick Ajamang, who maybe doesn't get called in if Ricardo Pepi is fit. But regardless, no surprises to me here. Maybe the one guy that I'm a little surprised is on the list is Miles Robinson. But still not really anybody that's like out of the blue or an experiment or anything like that. They're here because they've earned it. Maybe I'm also a little surprised by Brendan Aronson because, he's not been great for Leeds. He's playing, though. So everybody on the list is defensible.
Yeah. Well, let's go through a position by position. Let's start with center back, or not center back. Sorry. Let's go through goalkeepers first, which I think probably is the least to talk about. The goalkeepers he's bringing is Chris Brady, Matt Freese, Patrick Schulte, Matt Turner. I think we felt pretty confident Matt Freese and Matt Turner would be there for sure. We weren't sure who that third one would be. It looks like he went with 4.
He isn't sure either.
Yeah, he went with Chris Brady and Patrick Schulte over guys like Zach Steffen, Jonathan Klinsmann, Roman Celentano, Gaga Slonina. I can't say that I really knew who he was going to go with there outside of like Freese and Turner. I can't say I'm really surprised. I mean, what are your thoughts on the goalkeepers?
I'm a little surprised that Jonathan Klinsmann didn't get another call up. I think he's been playing for Parma and playing well. Parma, right? I think.
No, he's who is the Serie? It's in Serie B. I cannot think of his club off the top of my head.
Cessna.
That's it.
He's been playing for them, and it seemed like he had done well with the U.S., and Poch was appreciative of his performances, so I'm a little surprised he didn't get a call in. The only other guy that I thought might get a look at camp would be Diego Cochin, only because he was supposed to play for the U20 team in the World Cup and got recalled to Barcelona literally the day before it started because Joan Garcia got hurt and Wojciech Szczesny is now, the backup is now playing, and Cochin is third string. So now he has to go and back up Szczesny, which is monumentally frustrating for a guy like Cochin who needs minutes at every opportunity and just is not getting them. And so I figured maybe Pochettino would call him in as like a, hey, we like you. You're in the national team setup. Like, let's give you a camp. You're not going to play, but like, let's give you a camp just to sort of continue that workout and sort of a makeup, right, for him not getting to play at the U20 World Cup. But he's not here, so that's moot. So none of this is terribly surprising.
That would have been some serious flight miles for that guy. He flew all the way to Chile, all the way back to Barcelona. Then he would have had to come to the U.S. Yeah. Again, I think you kind of do see the kind of the pecking order here, though. I mean, the fact that Zach Steffen wasn't brought in, I mean, you got to think for him to make a World Cup roster now, you got to think that that's very, very low probability.
And to your point, you see the pecking order. You've got 2 battles here now at goalkeeper. You've got a battle for starter and you've got a battle for third place. So
Exactly.
That's what we're looking at here.
That's right. Okay, let's talk about the defenders, which I think is a little bit more of a more interesting discussion. He brought in 8 defenders, 5 center backs, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Miles Robinson, and then 3 outside backs, Max Arfston, Alex Freeman, Anthony Robinson. Guys not included here, Serginho Dest, Joe Scally, Tristan Blackman, Walker Zimmerman, George Campbell, Austin Trusty, Noah Kai Banks. There's more, but those are some of the guys left off. Center back position is one we talk about a lot, where we knew Chris Richards, Tim Ream were the top 2. We really didn't know who he rated, even as the third guy. What do you take from this list that he announced today?
I take that they're going to play 3 center backs moving forward.
Okay.
Because of the split. And the reason there's so few fullbacks is because you don't need them. You've got Tim Weah and Weston McKennie who can both play fullback or wingback. You don't really want McKennie playing wingback. I don't think that's his best position. He's been playing that though at Juventus. So you've got guys who can fill those spots. You don't need as many natural wingbacks. I would not be shocked to see Tim Weah at right wingback because I do not expect. Because Serginho Dest isn't here, first of all, and Alex Freeman is more of a defensive guy. He's more of a natural fullback rather than a wingback. So I would expect to see Tim Weah in there. On the other side, I don't expect to see Anthony Robinson a lot. From what it sounded like in Pochettino's press conference, they brought him in more to like get him back in camp rather than to get him a ton of minutes. He's still working his way back from knee surgery. He's only just barely started to play with Fulham again. So I don't expect to see him on the field a lot, which is fine. Max Arfston is fine there. He's better at wingback than fullback anyways, because you want him doing less defensive work. So yeah, I think we're playing 3 center backs here.
Yeah. So there was the question at the press conference where Poch was asked about, hey, you're only bringing in one natural right back, and Poch made the comment, I wrote it down here. I cannot explain. What did he say here? I cannot.
He said, I can't explain because I don't want to give it away
an idea to Ecuador and Australia. Yeah. And so, yeah. So he was like, I don't want to tell you too much here because I don't want to like give away our strategy. But I thought the same thing when I heard that, okay, we're probably going to play a back 3 here, or at least one of the matches we're going to play a back 3 here. And I absolutely agree with you. I fully expect to see Tim Weah on that right wing back spot. And I've seen a lot of discussion on this, this new back 3 where who's going to be underneath the striker, kind of along with Christian Pulisic, who's going to be like right beside him. And people are talking about, is it Tillman? Is it Weah? I don't know if I see Weah there. I think it's actually could come down between Weah and Dest as a right wing back. I mean, I know that might sound crazy for some folks, but Weah has played. I mean, he is like a great out wide player. And if you're going to play that system with wing backs, I mean, he's played a lot of wing back in his career. And Poch might be, looking at him there. I mean, we won't know. I think we'll see it this window for sure, but we won't know really until you see maybe Dest back in camp, what he thinks there. But
I think, too, to build on that, Pulisic's best spot is not going to be behind the striker. It's going to be on the right wing in a 3-4-3. Or if you play a 3-5-2, then fine. But because maybe you don't want to give up too much in midfield. But the idea of the 3-4-3 is that your wing backs give you the width on the overlap, and then those 2 wingers cut inside. To me, that is perfect for Haji Wright and Christian Pulisic to be flanking either Pepe or Balogun, because both of those guys love to cut inside. You get Haji Wright to cut in as sort of a second striker beside Balogun or Pepe, and then you get Pulisic to cut inside behind them as a sort of quasi 10. So you've got an unbalanced 3-5-2 or a 3-4-1-2 that ends up defensively looking like a 3-4-3. To me, that fits exactly what Pochettino likes and wants to do and this roster. And you get Weah and Arfston on both sides, or Dest and Jedi, however you put it together. And there you go. And then if you have Jedi on the left, eventually when he's fit, now you have a guy that can truly do both in defend and get forward. And you can allow Weah to bomb, and you can have Jedi to kind of sit in that in between and end up along the back line if you need more of a defensive setup. It's perfect. And so I think that's sort of where this will flush out, or at least that's how I would flush it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of different options there. That's going to be interesting to see how he plays it out. I mean, I think the other thing we're talking about here is the center backs. He seems like he'd been doing a lot of experimentation at center back, bringing in Tristan Blackman last camp, starting them both matches. He seemed to just kind of go back with the old regime. Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Miles Robinson. I mean, these are the guys we've kind of seen with the team for a long time, and we wondered if he had kind of given up on some of them. Like, we wondered, was he seeing something with Mark McKenzie and Miles Robinson he didn't like? But he just went with those guys. I mean, do you think this is the 5, that do you see anybody else breaking in besides these 5, going forward?
The answer to the first part of your question is yes. And I think these are the guys that have the most to lose in the next few months. When we say this is the World Cup roster, I think these are the guys that could play their way out of the World Cup roster if they lose form. Because there's a lot of guys on here who have played well for their clubs and not necessarily with the national team. Mostly I'm looking at Cameron Carter-Vickers. If he drops his level at all, he's out. But the answer to the second part of your question is there aren't that many guys that could step in and really like take the spot. A lot of these guys that Pochettino trialed over the last few months weren't great.
Tristan Blackman, Walker Zimmerman.
Blackman's hurt now and that may be a minute.
That's true. That's true. Austin Trusty.
He wasn't great. Trusty hasn't been here for a while. I think, a guy like Noah Kai Banks is very highly rated, but he's not playing for Augsburg. So like you got to wait until he breaks into the club level before you can really trust him at the international level. There's just not a lot of options. And so right now, these are the guys more by default than anything. But certainly if they drop their level at all, I'm thinking, Carter-Vickers, if they lose early in the Europa League and he's only playing against Scottish Premiership opposition, you really start to wonder, can he come to the national team level and will he be able to keep that form? Miles Robinson, he seems like he's on a knife edge. Mark McKenzie hasn't been great for the national team the last couple of times he's appeared. So there's a lot to lose there. The problem is there's not much behind them.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to think Cameron Carter-Vickers, Mark McKenzie, Miles Robinson. Those guys are all three kind of dead even probably in Poch's mind. If one of them doesn't perform very well, I wonder if he does experiment with bringing in like a George Campbell, which
who
I
would
wondered
very
if he'd
much deserve it. I thought he would be on this roster.
Yeah, who's been playing regularly in the championship. So he might be the guy that maybe steps into the next camp, kind of like
I could
James
see an
Sands,
Eric Palmer Brown being an option too. He's playing regularly for his French club.
Okay, so let's go to midfielders then. So this is the one where, man, when I look at the guys who made it and then I look at the list who didn't, I mean, there's a lot of names left off here, but the midfielders called in, there's 8 of them: Brendan Aronson, Diego Luna, Weston McKennie, Aiden Morris, Christian Roldan, James Sands, Tanner Tessman, Malik Tillman. But listen to this list of names of guys that got left out. Tyler Adams, which we discussed, was for family reasons. Jack McGlynn, Luca De La Torre, Sebastian Berhalter, Yunus Musa, Johnny Cardoso, Gio Reyna, to name a few. I mean, a lot of big names left out there. What's your biggest takeaways from the calls he made on these midfielders here?
I think the hardest part about the guys that you left out, aside from Adams, are who would you remove to bring them in? Because everybody on this roster deserves to be here. Now, you look at Sands and Roldan or Morris, and you think one of those guys is probably off if Adams is available. But Sands has been great for St. Pauli. Roldan was very good after being added to the roster last camp and playing in that 3 center back system as sort of a cover for the back line, and has been, some people would argue, the best midfielder in MLS this season, or at least amongst them. Aiden Morris has been playing very well for Middlesbrough. Weston McKennie has forced his way back into the Juventus lineup after our what seems like annual question about, Weston McKennie's not playing for Juventus, what's going to happen there? And then he plays his way in every single dang season. Tanner Tessman has been really good for the U.S. national team when brought in earlier, and it looked like he was kind of a Poch guy. So, and Luna the same way. Who do you leave out? If you bring some of those guys in, this is probably a show me what you got moment for Sands. Like if he doesn't perform great, he's probably out, and maybe you bring somebody in. But maybe that Adams is the guy. Now what do you do? Like who else do you leave off for those other names you mentioned? McGlynn is the only one I think could play his way in, only because of his set piece ability, his shooting from long range, and Poch seems to love him. Otherwise, I just don't see any of those guys breaking their way back in, especially Yunus Musa. Like, you gotta be playing for your club. He had an assist in the Champions League off the bench this week, so like maybe he gets a chance, but gotta figure it out at Atalanta before he makes his way in. And we didn't even, in the defenders, mention Joe Scally, because, and so this applies to Gio Reyna too. What a dumpster fire Gladbach have been this year. So they have to figure it out at the club level before they can have an argument of being in. And Reyna's hurt, so like doubly figure it out. I just don't see a way in for a lot of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got to figure about next to Adams. Adams is going to be in there. I think you're absolutely right. Aiden Morris, Roldan, James Sands, even Tessman. Even though I think Tessman has been so excellent. Those four are kind of competing for a lot of those same spots that like Sebastian Berhalter, Yunus Musa, Johnny Cardoso, who got left out, are going to be competing for. But maybe the other guy is Brennan Aronson. You mentioned being a little surprised he was brought in. I was a little surprised he was brought in. He's another guy I could see not quite making it if you wanted to bring in one of these other midfielders. I've always thought Anderson's an ideal like squad player, because he can play so many positions and because he's a guy that you can bring in specific moments.
And he presses,
into a match.
which Pochettino loves.
He's probably the best presser, on the team. And so I've always thought he's a good squad player, but
he hasn't brought much the last couple times he's been on.
He hasn't. But this list of midfielders, I'm not saying we have this huge list of elite midfielders, but we have a lot of quality midfielders that seem to be around the same tier of quality. And picking through these, I would imagine they spend a lot of time at a round table trying to figure out which ones to bring in.
And to Pochettino's credit, I still personally believe that the use of the last few international breaks was a bit of a waste, not getting the first teamers involved more and building more chemistry ahead of the World Cup. So let me start by saying that. However, in Pochettino's defense, a number of the guys that we just mentioned as being left out that could work their way back in were not in the picture before those couple of months. And a few of the guys in the roster were not in the picture before the last few months of experimentation. Diego Luna, Christian Roldan, you look at
Max Arston, Alex Freeman.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it to just the midfield here, but even they got Jack McGlynn. Some of these guys were nowhere near the picture before Pochettino began tinkering with things in the Gold Cup in September, yada, yada. So to his credit, the depth chart kind of is the way it is, partly because of that experimentation. And some of these players have proven their value. Like, hey, this is what I can bring to the national team. And now we kind of have to consider them as part of the mix.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. He built some depth with this experimentation.
Yes.
And he made it super competitive, especially in the midfield.
My argument against that would be, why are we spending so much time on guys that are going to play 10 to 20% of the minutes at the World Cup when we need to be focusing on the guys who are going to be playing 80 to 90% of the minutes at the World Cup? That would be my retort. But I want to give him credit because given what his goals clearly were over the last few months, those goals were achieved with what I would say flying colors. I think they're the wrong goals, but those goals were very much achieved.
Yeah. You should tell him that in the next press conference. He seemed a little.
He seemed a
little sensitive today. He could use some positivity, I think. Let's talk about the forwards. He brought in Patrick Agyemang, Fulham Balogun, Christian Pulisic, Timothy Weah, Haji Wright, Alex Zendejas. So the guys that were left off: Ricardo Pepi, Josh Sargent, Brian White. I think maybe the more notable ones. What's your thoughts on these forwards? Anything surprise you here?
This is the most solidified group of the group, which I think we are sort of shocked to say, given the troubles that this team has had with the striker position. But the only guy who's out that's probably in is Ricardo Pepi, and you would probably replace Agyemang with him on the roster. Other than that, these are the guys. I think Zendejas has more than proven he belongs. And who are you going to replace him with? There's nobody else in form that should go there. The guys that you mentioned who are on the outside, Pepe's hurt, and everybody else is not of the caliber that they need. And I think these are the guys. With all the shuffling that we've talked about in the other positions, I don't see anybody who would break into this group.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Reasonably.
I'm looking at the guys not included. Pepe's the only one.
Right.
Pepe's going to replace one of these guys, I think.
It'll be Ajimang.
I could think it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Haji Wright either. I mean, I know Haji Wright is just playing incredibly. I know. I still, for some reason, don't feel like Poch rates him that high.
And what's great about Haji too, though, that I think what's great about him is he's a natural winger that can play striker, so you can fit him in both. And if you end up leaving a natural striker like Ajimang off, you now only have two natural strikers in Pepe and Balogun, but you can play right there if you need to, like God forbid somebody gets hurt or whatever. There's just more flexibility there. I think he brings so much more right now. Ajimang is still has a lot to prove on the European level, I think.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty strong statement. He brought Ajimang in. I mean, he just now is starting with Derby County, getting back from the injury. So I could have seen him easily being left off to be like, okay, you're just now getting back to full form with your club, stay over there. But the fact that he brought him in over like a Josh Sargent, I think is a big statement for how he rates Ajimang, versus
Sargent's
Sargent.
cooked, man. Maybe you give him another shot once the World Cup is over, and when you have a new cycle, like say, hey, we see what you're doing at the club level, we respect it. Come on in, have another shot. Like, let's get you going. But for this World Cup, that ship has sailed.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you a few things about the press conference. So we just got off the press conference not too long ago. There was a lot of nothing sandwiches in there from Poch, but there was also some very entertaining moments as well. Jeff Carlisle from ESPN seemed to get the brunt of it when he asked. I think he asked why Musa and Scally weren't on there, and Poch gave him the, give me your list of players next time, and we'll debate. He seems to be really sensitive to that. He went on to talk about how he doesn't give any explanations to the players if they make it in or they don't make it in. He doesn't tell them why either way. He got asked about that. And that launched an even bigger speech in terms of that players don't need to know. And if they need to know, then they don't feel the same as me inside about how football should be, essentially. I mean, what did you take about that whole discussion in the press conference?
I think, so first of all, poor Jeff Carlisle. The guy dared to ask why two of the biggest names that were left off were left off. And Poch basically said, well, if they're not Messi, I don't need to tell you.
Yeah.
Which seemed aggressive. But I think credit Henry Bushnell for asking a great follow-up question about...
I was wondering the exact same thing. I agree with you.
Why don't you tell players why they were left off or why they were included? He said, I don't tell them either way. And I think a lot of that was posturing. I think what was veiled inside that was, if they want to know, they can ask. And he said, I will tell them if they ask. And what I remember, I think, hearing was nobody asked after the Gold Cup. And to me, what he was saying was, first of all, he said, if you don't know why you were left off, ask it yourself again because you know. And to his credit, I think that's largely true. We're all looking at most of the players left off going, even if we don't agree, right? Like, even if you think Joe Scally should be there, even if you think Yunus Musa should be there, you could build a very coherent argument for why they aren't. There's nobody on this list that's like, why the hell aren't they here? So he's telling those players, and I think the more important part of that is, if you really want to know, ask. Because that's how I think those players show they care. And he's like, my office is open, my phone is open, call me. But he made it very clear, Kyle, that he doesn't want them to ask why I didn't make the roster. What he wants them to ask is, what do you expect from me? What do you expect from me? That's what he wants to hear from the players, so that he can tell them what he expects from them. And I think making that, we as fans have always, or as media have always said, why doesn't Poch reach out to them to take care of his national team player pool, right? To show every player, to give every player the best opportunity to improve and make their case. And I think Poch is saying that's not my job. If the player wants to be here and they need to know what they can do to be here, they need to ask me because they are professionals and I want to give the players the most attention that want to be here and care enough to ask. And I think that's quite valid.
Yeah.
This isn't like U16, right? Like I'm not developing young talent. These are fully fledged professionals. And if they want to know, they can ask me.
Yeah. See, I think, I don't know if I got that he wants him to ask, and maybe it's something subliminal there. I got it more of like, don't ask, show me, like perform. Like I don't, we can talk all we want. I can tell you this reason, that reason. Go out there, play your tail off, run your tail off, be the best player at your club, blow me away with your performance, and then you won't have to ask. Trust me, if you do that, you'll be here. Like he's sick of all the talking. That's kind of what I took from it.
I can't imagine though if Joe Scally called him up and was like, "Look, I'm playing every day for my club. I know we're ass right now, but like, what do I got to do to be here?" I can't imagine he would be like, "Don't call me again."
Yeah, no, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Yeah, Joe Scally, man. To your point that we're not sitting here saying like it was absolutely egregious he left off, this player or that player.
Even
I
Musa.
agree with not bringing in Yunus Musa.
No.
I agree with not even bringing in Joe Scally. I mean, if he wants, I think Joe Scally is a good player. I like Joe Scally. I have no problem with him being on the team. But Pochettino likes out fullbacks that can get forward. I mean, Scally just doesn't fit his style of play unless he's going to play him as like a third center back, or something like that. I know he's starting to get forward more for Gladbach now, but I understand why he's not bringing him in.
Let me give you some numbers on Joe Scally. This is from FB Ref over the last 365 days against fullbacks. Shots, 18th percentile. Shot creating actions, 6th percentile. Progressive passes, 16th percentile. Progressive carries, 44th percentile. Progressive passes received, 20th percentile. Okay, you're not an attacking fullback at all. How about your defensive numbers? Blocks, 85th percentile, great. Clearances, 69th percentile. Aerial duels, 70th percentile. Tackles, 17th percentile. Interceptions, 20th percentile. He just doesn't have the profile Poch wants, and that's totally understandable.
Yeah, you get it. He's a good player, solid player. I could see him maybe making it in as a squad player as well, but he clearly doesn't fit the profile that Poch is looking for, and it's as simple as that. All right, Kyle. Well, that was a good breakdown. Enjoyed that. Enjoyed the press conference. Enjoyed your thoughts on it. Now
maybe I'll get called on next time. Probably.
Maybe we'll get called. I was waiting for it. I was like, oh, Kyle's gonna get him. Kyle's gonna get him all revved up, but he was already revved up. I think by the time you were getting close in the line. Well, now we know the roster. Now we'll start thinking about starting 11s, how these friendlies are going to look. But for now, we'll just let this roster resonate a little bit more. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. I'll make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is @the_bonfire, and also to your work at the Sporting News. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X @FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.